There is a kind of darkness people carry inside them, silent, invisible, and far more dangerous than anger. Anger burns fast, explodes, and disappears. But hatred? Hatred is patient. It waits. It grows roots. It shapes the way someone looks at you, talks to you, and thinks about you. And the most terrifying truth is this: hatred rarely announces itself. It hides behind silence, behind fake smiles, behind the sudden coldness of someone who once felt familiar. The Stoics warned us about this. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the human heart becomes twisted long before the face does. Seneca believed that hatred corrodes the soul of the hater before it harms the person they hate. But in the real world, most people don't recognize hatred until it has already done its damage. They mistake it for mood swings, jealousy, or simple irritation, never realizing they are standing inches away from an emotion powerful enough to poison relationships, break trust, and destroy peace. Today we uncover the 9 subtle signs of real hatred, and why this emotion, if ignored, becomes more dangerous than anger ever could. He had always believed that anger was the worst thing a person could throw at you. The raised voice, the sharp words, the explosive reactions. These were easy to spot, easy to understand. But what he didn't know, what life would force him to learn, was that hatred doesn't come wrapped in noise. It arrives quietly, slipping into someone's behavior one small shift at a time. The story begins on a cold November evening. He sat by the window, watching the last bit of sunlight fade behind the buildings. There was a heaviness in the air, something he couldn't name. Someone close to him, someone he trusted, had changed. The tone, the energy, the way they looked at him, none of it felt the same. And the worst part? They never said a word. No fight. No argument. No dramatic moment. Just quiet distance, the kind that feels colder than any winter night. He remembered something he once read in the teachings of Epictetus. If another harms you, it is not the act itself, but the meaning you attach to it that wounds you. At that moment, he wondered if he was imagining things. Maybe he was overthinking. Maybe people simply get busy, get tired, get distant. But deep inside, a voice whispered, "No, this is something else." Over the next few days, the signs began to appear. Subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. A smile that didn't reach the eyes. A reply that felt forced. A sudden lack of warmth. Hatred doesn't start with violence. It starts with withdrawal. And that withdrawal, he realized, was the first crack in something he thought was unbreakable. That's when he made a decision. He would understand this emotion, not just for himself, but for everyone who has ever been blindsided by someone's hidden resentment. And to understand hatred, he first had to go back to the wisdom of the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius taught that emotions don't become dangerous when they appear. They become dangerous when they are ignored. Hatred becomes powerful because people pretend it doesn't exist. They look away. They excuse the behavior. They tell themselves, it's nothing. But hatred is never nothing. It's a slow poison, a mental corrosion, a quiet war that begins inside someone's heart long before it reaches their actions. So he began to observe more carefully, more honestly. And the more he watched, the clearer the patterns became. Hatred never arrives suddenly. It sends early signals, signals most people overlook. Today's journey starts with understanding those signals, those warning signs, those subtle shifts that reveal the presence of something far more dangerous than anger. Because anger may hurt you once, but hatred? Hatred destroys you silently, piece by piece. And in the next sessions, we will uncover each of the 9 signs of real hatred, breaking them down through this story, through psychology, and through the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy. The next morning arrived with a quiet heaviness, the kind that settles inside the chest before the mind even wakes up. He opened his eyes slowly, as if his body already knew that something in his world had shifted. The clarity he gained last night wasn't comforting, it was sharp, honest, and painfully real. For the first time, he had begun to see hatred not as a loud emotion, but as a silent transformation, a gradual change, a slow-burning truth. He stepped outside, and the cold morning air brushed against his face like a reminder that the world remained honest even when people didn't. As he walked, he replayed the recent days in his mind. Moments he had ignored, moments that now revealed everything. Hatred, he realized, doesn't start with shouting. It begins with small silences, with energy shifts, with the subtle draining of warmth. He had noticed these changes before, but he told himself stories to avoid the truth. Now no more stories remained, only understanding. He remembered something Seneca once wrote: "A man's hatred is not born in a single moment, it grows quietly in the corners of the heart where honesty refuses to look." That sentence now lingered in his thoughts as he tried to make sense of everything. The way conversations had become short. The way interest had faded. The way the air between them had lost its softness. These were not random changes. These were symptoms. That was when he recalled the first sign he had felt, the sudden emotional coldness. It wasn't anger. It was emptiness. A controlled withdrawal of warmth, like a switch someone had turned off without saying a word. When someone secretly hates you, they don't explode. They detach. They stop caring. They treat your presence as something that no longer matters. That coldness had crept in slowly, and now it made perfect sense. But what hurt him the most wasn't the coldness, it was the loss of respect. Respect doesn't vanish overnight. It slowly erodes until nothing remains. He remembered when the person who once valued his thoughts began questioning everything he said, brushing off his ideas with subtle sarcasm. Not loud disrespect, quiet dismissal. A gesture, the tone, a small smirk. These tiny cracks were not accidents. They were signs. Hatred cannot coexist with respect. When respect dies, something darker takes its place. Epictetus taught that a wise man does not depend on the approval of others, but he also warned that disrespect is a signal of inner turmoil. A person doesn't hate you because of your flaws. They hate you because your truth reminds them of things they cannot face within themselves. And instead of fighting their insecurity, they fight you. He saw that now. What he once saw as irritation was actually resentment. What he thought was stress was actually silent bitterness. And what he believed was distance was hatred. His memories traveled further, landing on moments he had completely overlooked. Moments where the air felt competitive when it never needed to be. He remembered sharing his progress, expecting support, but receiving quiet tension instead. Even small accomplishments seemed to bother them. It was subtle, but the shift was undeniable. Hatred doesn't always look like conflict. Sometimes, it looks like unnecessary competition. A person who hates you doesn't want you to win, not because they want victory, but because your success feels like their failure. Your growth becomes their discomfort. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that envy is a sickness of the soul. That line echoed in his mind. He finally saw that the competition wasn't about improvement, it was about undermining. Every small win he had made them feel smaller within themselves. And instead of confronting their insecurities, they turned them into silent rivalry. That realization cut deeper than any argument ever could. By the time he reached the corner of the street, everything inside him began aligning like pieces of a puzzle that had taken far too long to assemble. Emotional coldness, loss of respect, silent competitiveness. These weren't isolated moments, they were connected threads of a deeper truth. Hatred had been present for a long time. It had just been hiding behind behaviors he didn't have the courage to question. But for the first time, he wasn't drowning in confusion. He wasn't blaming himself. He wasn't trying to fix what was already broken. He was simply observing, calmly, quietly, almost stoically. Seneca said that pain becomes bearable when understood, and Marcus Aurelius taught that clarity liberates the mind. In that moment, he realized he had finally stepped into that clarity. Later that evening, he sat alone by the window again, watching the fading light paint the room in shades of gold. But the darkness outside didn't feel as heavy as it used to. Something had shifted inside him. Awareness had replaced confusion. Strength had replaced vulnerability. And acceptance had replaced denial. He whispered to himself, not out of defeat but out of understanding. Hatred doesn't destroy me. Not anymore. No, I see it. And the moment you see hatred clearly, it loses its power. The journey was far from over. There were more signs ahead, deeper ones, darker ones, truths he still needed to uncover. But he was ready. Not with fear, with clarity. The following day unfolded slowly, almost as if time itself had become cautious around him. He woke up with that same quiet weight in his chest, but now it felt different. Not confusing or overwhelming, but strangely grounding. Awareness has a way of settling the mind, even when the truth is painful. He had crossed a point of no return. Once you see hatred clearly, you can never unsee it again. He spent the morning lost in thought, remembering incidents that once felt insignificant. Conversations he brushed off. Reactions he excused. Silences he thought were natural. Now, every memory carried a different meaning. Hatred wasn't loud, it was silent. It wasn't explosive, it was consistent. And it wasn't obvious, it was subtle, woven into tiny behaviors he had ignored for far too long. While walking later that day, another memory resurfaced. A moment that had bothered him for months, though he could never explain why. A simple conversation, casual on the surface, yet filled with something sharp underneath. A joke that wasn't a joke. A smile that didn't feel genuine. He remembered how he laughed it off that day, convincing himself that maybe he was too sensitive. But now he understood. That moment was not humor, it was hostility wrapped in politeness. Hatred rarely speaks openly. It hides behind passive-aggressive remarks, disguised as harmless comments. Seneca once said that hatred wounds silently, aiming for the heart without ever raising its voice. He realized that the small sarcastic comments, the subtle jabs, the disguised mockery, those were not accidents. They were signals. Signals of an emotion that refused to reveal itself fully, yet couldn't stay hidden either. He had mistaken these moments for ordinary tension. But now he recognized them as the quiet burns of resentment. He continued walking, letting the cool breeze brush against him, clearing his thoughts. The street was loud, but his mind had found a strange silence. And in that silence, another truth emerged, the growing distance. Not the kind created by time or responsibilities, but the kind created intentionally. He remembered how the person who once stayed close had slowly begun to drift away, offering excuses instead of conversations, avoidance instead of presence. At first, he had believed their explanations. Everyone gets busy. Everyone needs space. But distance created by hatred feels different. It feels calculated. It feels cold. Humans do not avoid those they love or even those they're angry with. They avoid those whose presence stirs something uncomfortable inside them. Hatred doesn't try to resolve conflict. It tries to escape it. And the more he replayed those moments of withdrawal, the delayed replies, the forced excuses, the sudden emotional unavailability, the more he saw the truth. This wasn't space. This wasn't rest. This was escape. Epictetus once said that a man turns away from what disturbs his inner peace. And if you become the thing someone avoids, it means your presence threatens something inside them they do not want to face. That realization struck him deeply. It wasn't his actions, his words, or his flaws, it was what he represented to them. A mirror they didn't want to look into. As the day went on, memories came in waves. He remembered announcing small victories in his life, growth he was proud of, progress he had worked hard for. At first, he expected celebration, but what he received was something else entirely. A strange stiffness. Pause. A forced congratulations. And behind it all, a discomfort they couldn't hide. That discomfort now made perfect sense. Hatred does not openly attack your success. It quietly hopes it fades. A person who hates you doesn't seek your downfall by action. They simply wish for your silence, your stagnation, your failure. They are unsettled by your rise because it reminds them of their own lack of movement. Marcus Aurelius wrote that envy is a sickness of those trapped within their own discontent. He understood now that someone who hates you does not need to harm you, they simply refuse to be happy for you. And that refusal is more telling than any argument. By evening, he found himself standing at the same window he had stood before, watching the sky shift from gold to blue. But today the darkness didn't scare him. It reflected him. Not the hurt but the understanding. Not the confusion but the clarity. The signs had always been there, soft, silent, subtle. And now he was finally able to name them, accept them, and see them without fear. He whispered to himself, almost like a reminder carved in stone. When hatred hides, its silence speaks louder than its presence. And with that realization he felt something inside him settle. Not peace but acceptance. Not relief but readiness. There were still more signs to uncover, deeper layers to understand. But now he was prepared. Prepared to see everything he once ignored. Prepared to face truths he once softened. The story wasn't ending, it was unfolding. The path ahead was still dark, but he finally knew how to walk through it. If you're ready, say. There comes a moment in every person's journey where silence becomes a mirror. A mirror that doesn't show your face, but your truth. Most people run from that mirror because facing yourself demands more courage than facing the entire world. This is the point where life tests you, not with noise but with quiet. And in that quiet, your demons speak louder than ever. But that quiet also holds another voice. The voice of inner strength that has been waiting for you to finally listen. This is what ancient Stoics tried to teach. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Meaning, whatever you repeatedly think, you eventually become. If fear is your constant thought, you become fear. If pain is your constant thought, you become pain. But if purpose is your constant thought, you become unbreakable. And that's exactly where our main character now stands, between fear and purpose, between the man he was and the man he must become. He sat alone beside the riverbank, knees pulled close to his chest, watching the slow ripples break the reflection of the moon. Hours had passed, but time no longer mattered. The argument he had with his friend earlier kept replaying in his mind. The words, the tone, the frustration, it all felt heavier now in the silence. He whispered to himself, "Why does every step forward feel like 10 steps back?" The wind carried no answer, but his thoughts did. He remembered the moment his friend had called him lost. Not in a cruel way, but in a disappointed way. And somehow, disappointment hurts more than anger. It digs deeper because it comes from someone who cares. For the first time, he realized that the people around him weren't distancing themselves because they disliked him. They were distancing because he was drifting without direction. And watching someone drown without fighting back is painful. So they stepped back. He closed his eyes and took a long breath. "Maybe they're right," he murmured. "Maybe I am running in circles." But then another thought surfaced, one he had avoided for years. What if the problem wasn't that he was lost, but that he never allowed himself to be found? He always carried everything alone. Every fear, every pressure, every expectation. He thought that asking for help was weakness. That vulnerability made him small. And now, with the night sitting heavy around him, he could finally see the truth. He wasn't weak because he struggled. He was weak because he hid the struggle. Stoic philosophy echoed in his mind, Epictetus' reminder that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And suddenly everything made sense. The real battle wasn't happening around him, it was happening inside him. His mind was the battlefield he never prepared for. As he sat there, a strange clarity emerged. The river, the wind, the cold grass beneath him, all of it felt like a layer of life he had ignored for too long. He'd been living like a ghost inside his own existence. Watching life, not living it. Reacting, not choosing. Wanting change, but avoiding the discomfort required to create it. He whispered, "If I want a different ending, I need to start a different chapter." He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. His body felt tired, but his spirit felt awake for the first time in months. Maybe years. The walk back home was long and quiet, but the silence no longer felt heavy, it felt necessary. Healing doesn't happen in noise. Transformation doesn't happen in comfort. When he reached the small wooden gate outside his home, he paused. This gate had always felt like the line between his life inside and the world outside. A line he never crossed intentionally, only out of routine. But tonight, the gate didn't feel like a boundary. It felt like a beginning. He pushed it open gently and stepped inside. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A message. It was from the same friend he had argued with earlier. "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. No judgment." He stared at the message for a long time. Normally he would ignore it, pretend he was fine, bury everything. But tonight wasn't normal. Tonight was different. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed. "Thank you. I actually do need to talk." He pressed send before fear could stop him. For the first time, instead of hiding his pain, he allowed someone to step into it with him. And that single decision, small, simple, human, shifted something deep within. It felt like the first brick laid on the foundation of the man he wanted to become. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't have a perfect plan. But he had something far more powerful, willingness. The willingness to face himself. The willingness to grow. The willingness to try again. And sometimes that's all life needs from you, a single moment of honesty with yourself. Because the truth is, strength doesn't begin when you conquer the mountain. Strength begins when you finally admit you're standing at the bottom. And tonight he finally admitted it. Life has a strange way of testing your honesty. Not the kind of honesty you show to the world, but the honesty you show to yourself. Most people live behind masks, strong masks, confident masks, happy masks. And they wear them so long that they forget what their real face looks like. But when you finally decide to confront yourself, the mask cracks. And in that painful crack, something real begins to grow. Stoic thinkers believe that every soul has a fire inside it. A fire that can guide or burn depending on whether you control it or let it control you. And that's the exact stage our character is entering now. Not the stage of perfection, not the stage of clarity, but the stage of awakening. Because awakening is not a moment, it's a process. Morning came slowly the next day. Soft light leaked through the thin curtains as he lay in bed awake, staring at the ceiling. Sleep had been shallow but peaceful. For the first time in a long time, he hadn't gone to bed with a heavy chest. The message he sent last night was small, but it felt like he had moved a mountain inside his heart. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, still processing everything. His room looked the same. Messy desk, clothes draped over a chair, a half-finished notebook lying open. But somehow it all felt different. As if the room had been waiting for him to wake up, not just physically but mentally. And now, finally, he was here. He picked up the notebook. On the first page there were words he wrote months ago. One day I will understand myself. He ran his thumb along the edge of the page. For a moment he wondered if that day would ever come. But then he smiled faintly, because last night felt like the beginning of that understanding. His phone buzzed. It was the same friend again. "Let's meet today. If you're ready." He hesitated for a second, not out of fear but out of reflection. Meeting meant opening up. Meeting meant explaining everything he had buried. Meeting meant facing the parts of himself he had hid even from his closest people. But he typed back, "Yes, I'm ready." And surprisingly, he meant it. A couple of hours later, they met at an old cafe they used to visit years ago. The cafe was quiet, sunlight warming the wooden tables, the smell of coffee mixing with the soft hum of conversations around them. He sat down across from his friend, unsure where to begin. His friend looked at him calmly. "You seem different today." He took a slow breath. "I'm trying." Silence followed, not the heavy kind, but the kind that invites honesty. "I didn't realize how much I was shutting everyone out," he admitted. "I thought keeping things to myself made me strong." His friend shook his head gently. "Strength isn't about silence. Strength is about truth." Those words hit deeper than expected. He lowered his gaze. "I guess I was scared to be seen, scared someone would think less of me." "Real people don't think less of you," his friend replied softly. "They think more of you for being real." For the first time in months he felt understood. Not judged. Not pressured. Just understood. And that understanding became a bridge back to the version of himself he thought he had lost. He began talking. Slowly at first, then deeply. He talked about his confusion, his fears, his guilt, his loneliness. He talked about how he felt stuck between who he wanted to be and who he was becoming. He talked until his voice trembled, but he didn't stop. His friend listened without interrupting, without rushing, without trying to fix anything. Just listened. And that simple act was healing in ways he never expected. Finally, after what felt like an hour, his friend spoke. "You don't have to have everything figured out," he said. "Just don't stop trying. Don't stop growing. Don't stop showing up for yourself." The words settled into his chest like a warm flame. A small flame but steady. He nodded slowly. "I think I'm finally ready to face things, even if it takes time." His friend smiled. "Good. Because the only real failure is giving up on yourself." They talked a little more. Light conversation, gentle jokes, old memories, and for the first time in a long time he felt connected again. Not because someone saved him, but because he made the choice to reach back. Walking home later, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not loud, dramatic hope, but quiet, steady, disciplined hope. The kind Marcus Aurelius spoke about, the hope rooted not in wishing but in acting. The hope that comes from taking the smallest step forward, even when the path ahead is unclear. He knew his journey wasn't over. He knew there were many chapters left, many doubts, many lessons, many growths still waiting. But today taught him something important. Healing isn't a sudden transformation. Healing is a slow rebuilding. A brick at a time. A truth at a time. A choice at a time. And today he made the choice that mattered most. The choice to not abandon himself. That's where real strength begins. Not in winning the big battles, but in choosing not to walk away from the small ones inside your heart. There are moments in life when the world outside feels loud, but the world inside becomes louder. After meeting his friend that day, he walked home with a different kind of silence. One that felt peaceful instead of empty, warm instead of hollow. And in that silence, he realized something profound. When a man begins to understand his own emotions, he also begins to understand the emotions of others. That clarity is what separates anger from hatred, frustration from danger, and judgment from truth. The Stoics always believed that emotional awareness is not softness, it is power. And now, piece by piece, he was beginning to understand why. When he reached home, he didn't collapse into his bed or distract himself with a screen like he usually did. Instead, he placed his phone on the table, poured himself a glass of water, and sat by the window watching the evening sky shift from gold to blue. The cool breeze brushed his face as he closed his eyes, replaying everything he had said at the cafe. Every confession, every fear, every truth. It all felt strangely light now, as if sharing it had drained some of the poison he had been holding inside. For months he thought being silent made him strong. But now he understood something deeper. Silence is only strength when it comes from peace, not when it comes from pain. Painful silence becomes a prison. Peaceful silence becomes a teacher. As he sat there, he thought about hatred, how subtle it could be, how quietly it could plant itself in someone's heart. He remembered the second sign of real hatred that he had learned through his experiences. People who hate you will often pretend they don't care, but their actions always betray them. They avoid, they ignore, they withdraw, not because they're busy, but because their soul is unsettled by your presence. Not everyone will show hatred loudly. Some show hatred quietly, and that quiet hatred is the most dangerous because it approaches like smoke, slow, pale, almost invisible, yet capable of suffocating you before you even notice. He exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of things he had ignored for too long. He had seen this silent hatred in people before. A family member whose tone changed whenever he entered the room. A coworker who always found a way to dismiss him. A person from his past who acted neutral but carried an invisible resentment. He had always brushed it off, believing it wasn't worth thinking about. But deep down, he knew that recognizing hatred wasn't about judging others, it was about protecting himself. The sky darkened, the first streetlights flickering on. He opened his notebook again and wrote, "Why do people hate? And why does it affect me?" He stared at the question. It felt heavy but necessary. And he remembered something he once read from Seneca. Most hatred is born out of weakness, not strength. People hate when they feel threatened. People hate when they feel insecure. People hate when they cannot control you. And sometimes people hate when they see in you what they lack in themselves. For the first time, the signs began connecting inside his mind. It wasn't about the people who mistreated him. It was about understanding the psychology behind their actions. Once you understand the why, the effect becomes weaker. A soft knock on his door broke his thoughts. It was his younger cousin, standing hesitantly. "Can I sit here for a while?" the boy asked. He nodded silently, shifting to make space. The boy sat beside him, swinging his legs lightly, staring out the window. "You're quiet today," the boy said innocently. He smiled faintly. "Thinking. About what?" He hesitated but then replied honestly. "About people. About emotions. About why we feel the things we feel." The boy seemed confused at first, but nodded like he understood at least a part of it. After a quiet minute, the boy said, "You know, sometimes I feel like some people don't like me, even when I didn't do anything to them." His heart softened. "You know why that happens?" "Why?" "Because not everyone is fighting you. Some people are fighting themselves. They just aim that fight at you." The boy blinked, processing. "Did someone hurt you?" the boy asked softly. He shook his head. "Not today. But I think I'm finally understanding why certain people acted the way they did." The boy leaned his head on his shoulder, a simple gesture that warmed his chest. "You're not alone, you know," the boy murmured. And those words touched a place deep inside him. Maybe that's what he had forgotten, that even in loneliness someone quietly cares. Someone quietly waits. Someone quietly hopes you'll open up. Hatred may be loud, may be silent, may be sharp, may be cold, but love, support, and understanding often come quietly too. The boy eventually dozed off against his shoulder. He gently lifted him and guided him to the bed. After covering him with a blanket, he stood there for a moment, watching the small rise and fall of the boy's breathing. This was what mattered. Connection, clarity, courage. Not the noise of hatred, not the confusion of resentment, but the strength of understanding. He returned to the window, the air now cooler, the sky darker. And in that darkness, he didn't feel lost anymore. He felt aware. He felt alive. He felt ready. Because tonight something changed. Not in the world, but inside him. Night passed quietly, but the quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the quiet that comes right before a man begins to rebuild himself. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual. The air felt fresh, the light soft, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the heaviness pressing on his chest. He stretched, sat up, and let the sunlight fall across his face. Something inside him was shifting, slowly, gently, but undeniably. Healing rarely arrives with noise. Most healing comes in whispers. He walked into the kitchen and made himself tea. The warmth of the cup in his hands grounded him. As he took the first sip, memories from the past weeks flooded back. The misunderstandings, the hidden resentments, the unspoken tensions. He remembered the people who had smiled at him while carrying bitterness in their eyes. He remembered the moments he felt judged, ignored, or quietly pushed away. And for the first time, instead of pain, he felt clarity. There was a third sign of real hatred he finally understood. People who hate you don't look at you as a person, they look at you as a threat. They don't see your intentions, your struggles, or your heart. They only see what they fear, what they lack, or what they wish they could control. And because of that, they twist your existence into something that justifies their resentment. He took another sip of tea, looking out the window. Birds hopped across the balcony rail, pecking at crumbs. The world was moving in its natural rhythm, and for the first time he felt in sync with it. He wasn't chasing answers anymore. He wasn't running from emotions anymore. He was simply present. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside for a walk. The neighborhood was calm. Leaves rustled gently in the breeze, children laughed in the distance, and the sky held a soft gray glow. As he walked, he noticed people more closely, how some avoided eye contact, how some smiled genuinely, how some carried a subtle heaviness in their posture. It made him realize something. Most people have wounds they never talk about. And sometimes, those wounds become hatred. He reached a small park and sat on an empty bench. A few people were scattered around, an elderly man feeding birds, a couple arguing softly, a young girl practicing dance steps near a tree. Life was happening everywhere, each person carrying a story, each person carrying a burden. As he watched, he thought back to someone from his past, someone who used to make him feel small without saying much. The comments were subtle, the expressions sharp, the silence heavy. At the time, he thought something was wrong with him. But now, with clearer eyes, he understood the truth. That person never hated him for who he was. They hated him for who they couldn't be. Sometimes hatred has nothing to do with you. Sometimes hatred is a punishment people give themselves but direct toward you. He sighed deeply, letting the realization wash through him. It didn't hurt anymore. The sting had faded. Now it felt like understanding, clean, calm, neutral. A young girl approached the bench out of breath. She was probably 9 or 10. She held a notebook and asked, "Excuse me, can I sit here?" He nodded warmly. "Of course." She sat down, flipping open her notebook to reveal pages filled with messy drawings, sketches of trees, birds, and people. He glanced at them. "These are good." She smiled shyly. "I'm practicing. Some kids in my class said I'm bad, so I want to get better." He felt a familiar ache touch his chest. "Do you like drawing?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Then don't stop because of them." She looked up, confused. "But they said it's ugly." He leaned forward slightly. "Sometimes people say hurtful things because they're hurting inside, or because they don't understand you, or because your talent reminds them of something they don't have." She stared at him, processing every word. He picked up one of her sketches, a tree with shaky lines but a beautiful idea behind it. "Listen, improvement takes time. But courage? Courage you already have. If you love this, don't give anyone the power to take it away." She held the notebook closer to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled. "Keep drawing." The girl ran off, leaving behind a small spark of warmth in his heart. He hadn't realized how far he had come until he heard his own words. They didn't come from pain. They didn't come from anger. They came from a place of understanding. Understanding born from everything he had lived, endured, and learned. As he stood up from the bench and began walking back home, a quiet thought settled in his mind. Maybe life wasn't trying to break him. Maybe life was trying to shape him. Every sign of hatred, every cold shoulder, every bruise on his heart, it had all been leading him toward this moment. A moment where he finally understood that hatred from others does not define him. His response to it does. The path ahead was still uncertain, still long, still filled with challenges. But now he walked with a new kind of strength. Not loud strength, not tough strength, but the kind of strength that grows when a man understands himself deeply. He walked slowly, breathing calmly, aware of each step, aware of each thought. Because clarity is not the end of the journey. Clarity is the beginning.